Hey buddy, what are you looking at?
Spaceship.
What, where? Whoa! Oh no.
Hi, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz, and this is my first Red Giant Film Team experiment. Unless you've been living under a rock where they don't get YouTube or Facebook, you've probably encountered the work of Dan Hashimoto, the creator of the YouTube channel Action Movie Kid. Daniel was previously an animator at DreamWorks, and when you watch his work, two things become obvious. One, he's super talented. Two, he's a better parent than you. After I showed my kids some of his work, they wanted me to make some VFX videos with them.
Can you make some VFX videos with us?
What does VFX stand for?
I don't know. You told us to say that.
Honestly, I'm not a camera guy. I do post-production and visual effects, and about the only camera I'm comfortable shooting on is an iPhone, and that's what I used here. So here's how I did it. Step 1. Film your kid. Sounds easy, right? Well, I don't know how Dan gets it done, but my kid gave me exactly one take before someone yelled, "Time for ice cream," at our friends and family get-together, so it's the only take I got. Anyway, as you can see, I had my son act, and then I had him run off screen while I held the camera as steady as I could, and then I filmed things like he was being sucked up into a spaceship that, surprise, was not there. If you look closely, you can see that the shot is full of problems. The first problem being that the shot is blurry. You see, I was using Filmic Pro, which can shoot 24p, and you can use it to lock focus and lock exposure, and it's usually pretty awesome, provided that I'm not the one using it. I accidentally locked focus on the background instead of my kid, but I'll do my best to compensate for that later. The second problem is that my son clearly has to go to the bathroom, which I will now put on my list of things to ask him about in the future before I call action. Finally, I'm standing in a swarm of biting insects which totally sucked and was more a problem for me than for the end result, but yeah, I suffered for my art. Okay, with that done, step 2, start working with the footage. First, I use the iPhone app called Photo Transfer to make it easy to move the video from my phone to my Mac Pro. There's a free desktop app that makes the transfer easy between devices. Then I brought the footage into After Effects to do a 3D camera track. I crudely masked my son out of the shot so his motion wouldn't confuse the tracker. Now remember about a minute ago when I mentioned that my shot was blurry? Well, that came back to bite me on the behind right here, right away. After Effects had trouble tracking things, but with some pre-sharpening, I was able to track some to most of it. That helped a bunch, and the section I couldn't track, I manually futzed with the 3D camera to get a close enough approximation. With some added camera shake and lens flares, I'll cover up the mess. After that, I cut the footage so that my son is standing there in one frame and boom, gone the next. Okay, step 3, add visual effects. So next, I did a cheap rotoscope of his last frame on camera so I could cut him out and animate him beaming up. I animated him moving up the screen and into where I thought the spaceship would be. I could always correct it later if needed. Now I needed a spaceship. As I am a giant space nerd, I happen to have some 3D models handy. And this is one that I got from Turbo Squid a while back, really cool. I brought that into Video Copilot's Element 3D and I placed it into the shot. But I also wanted to have a hatch on the spaceship open to show an interior. And there is no hatch on this spaceship and no real inside. So rather than trying to alter the 3D model in a 3D application like Cinema 4D, with Element 3D, I made this pre-comp of an animated iris door opening. And I put a green solid behind that so I could key it out later. Then I used this as a texture for a flat plane and I added it to the spaceship in Element right at the bottom center of the ship. Then in After Effects, I used Primac Keyer to key out the green, which lets me see through the spaceship to another Element 3D layer behind it, which is a simple inverted cylinder with a sci-fi city texture. So when the iris opens, it looks like we're seeing inside the ship when we're actually seeing a layer behind it. To help sell the composite, I used Color Matcher from Red Giant's Key Correct Pro, which pushed the colors of the ship closer to the colors of the original background footage. Then I used a light wrap, also from Key Correct Pro, to wrap the light of the sky around the spaceship. This helps make it feel like the light from behind the ship is bleeding over to the front of it. It really brings it all together. I changed the mode setting from screen to over, which I felt like in this case gave it a more natural spill of light. The rest is pretty simple. For the beam, I used a combination of two masked blue solids that I combined to create a Fresnel effect so that the outside is more opaque than the center. These are just flat solids in 3D space. I also added another blue solid with a blurred circular mask to make it look like the floor was being lit up by the blue beam. I also animated several instances of Trapcode DAO to create the rings that come down from the spaceship and then bring my son back up to it. Just some nice extra motion that gives the beam up some momentum. I set Dow to show points instead of polygon faces or wireframes, and I also used the visibility settings to create some fall off towards the back of the rings so that it would disappear around the back of my sun with no rotoscoping needed. Hey, I'm lazy. Finally, I added some flickering lens flares with Red Giant Universe's No Light Factory EZ because, you know, science fiction. Now, when the ship leaves, I wanted it to feel like the warp was building up just before it happens. So, borrowing from J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, I warped the lens with Universe's chromatic aberration effect, and I added a light leak with Universe Overlight. It creates some additional anticipation for the hyperspace jump. As the ship leaves, I threw in some trapcode particular particles, also because science fiction. I used a particle system built from a preset in Particular 2.5's new effects builder. The biggest changes being that I removed the trailing aux particles, I changed it from a point emitter to a large box emitter to cover more area of the screen, and then I cranked up the number of particles to fill the sky. I also changed the color of the spark particles to a science fiction-y blue to match the rest of the alien technology, and frankly because it looks cooler. Step 4. Hide your mistakes. To sharpen the blurry image, I used Universe Finisher, and I also used Magic Bullet Colorista 3 to clean up some exposure and contrast issues. It doesn't make it perfect, but it makes it good enough for this kind of video. Finally, using a null and a simple wiggle expression, I did some fake camera shake with motion blur to hide as many of the flaws as I could. In the end, it looks pretty good, or at the very least, my son was impressed. If you like it, hey, it's a bonus. But either way, I hope that this inspires you to pick up a camera, even if it's really just a phone, shoot something, and tell your story. Once again, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz for Red Giant. I'll see you soon.